safe, reliable, free, and honest support. Qualities you cannot find online. Until now. Introducing the next generation of online technology support. What technology malfunctions are troubling you? Let us know today on the all-new support forums at www.theapplepost.com.
Welcome to Geek Cross, the podcast where faith and culture intersect. I'm your host, Jeremy Yoder, and each episode we look at a topic related to geekdom or pop culture and have conversations that use science fiction, fantasy, movie, games, or books as a jumping off point to talk about the deeper issues and to wrestle with the big questions of life. I'm very happy to have Kareem Tayloe today. Hi, Kareem.
Hey, Jeremy.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Oh, that's cool. My name is Kareem Tayloe. I am a lawyer here in Washington, D.C. I work for an organization called We Act for Environmental Justice, and that's the West Harlem Environmental Action Organization. And it's a Harlem or North Manhattan-based nonprofit that was founded in New York City, and it was the first environmental organization in New York State to be run by people of color and the first environmental justice organization in New York City. And I am the federal policy associate. So though we're headquartered in New York, I work here in D.C., and we do a number of things dealing with the United States EPA and working with members of Congress and just kind of rallying folks from a federal and a national perspective around environmental justice issues. And I'm also a childhood friend of Mr. Jeremy Yoder.
That's right. We go way back, actually.
Way
third
back.
grade. The third grade.
Back. Evanston, Illinois, Oakton Elementary School.
That's right.
Yeah.
But I mean, we kind of fell out of contact with each other. We made contact on Facebook. We Skyped each other a couple days ago. It's the first time we've talked to each other in about 20 years, so that's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Thanks
for
Facebook.
Thank you for coming on, Kareem. And so let's talk a little bit about what you do.
Okay.
A little bit. What is? You said you're a federal policy director. Is that a lobbying kind of position?
No. I'm not the director. I'm the federal policy associate. I am my federal policy director. Her name is Jalon White Newsom, and she is an awesome woman that actually has a science background in engineering. And so here in the D.C. office, she's been like the sole soldier on the ground for We Act in D.C. for about 3 years. And so she's done a number of things working with the federal agencies. And as her work has grown, they saw the need to kind of bring someone on to help her dive more into the federal issues that are affecting, people of color and low-income people and just people in general, just communities. And right now, we're waiting on some big rules to be released from the EPA around the Clean Power Plan. And so we're doing a lot of work around that. We're working with a number of organizations in about 6 states to kind of help them be prepared to respond to the rule that's going to be released by the EPA. And that rule kind of speaks to cutting down the emissions, the carbon emissions that power plants emit. States will then be required to put together what's called a state implementation plan to speak to how their states are going to cut emissions with power plants and include more types of clean energies to kind of help our carbon emission. Everything on the news, if you aren't paying attention, I know you are, but I mean your listeners, speaks to what's going on with our environment and climate change and things like that. And the Obama administration and the EPA are really just taking some big steps towards putting rules in place to just help a lot of these carbon emitters, these power plants, depending on coal and different types of fossil fuels, just to have some rules set in place to help them lower those emissions. So that's the kind of work that we're doing. It sounds really big, but I guess there's a level of lobbying, I guess, that comes with it. My role is to really just kind of help educate the organizations that will be helping the different ones in the different states to kind of just help them, do the work that they need to do in their own states to advocate for making sure that environmental justice and equity and, energy efficient options are available or included in their state's implementation plan of the Clean Power Plan rule.
What are the kinds of issues that are environmental issues that are facing people and communities of color?
Well, for sure, if you think about it, communities of colors, low-income people, and even, rural communities, depending on where you are, like, say, where we grew up in Evanston or Chicago, the South Side had a lot of old power plants, that kind of thing going on. So usually people of color and people who are low income tend to live closer to a lot of these power plants. And so they're going to be the people that are most affected in terms of, asthma and issues with air quality, even things like your sewage treatment facility is. Those tend to be in areas that people who don't have the means to maybe live out in the suburbs or to live further away from those kinds of things. So organizations like We Act and a number of other organizations that deal with communities and environmental justice and equity issues advocate for a lot of those communities that may not always have the political or the organizational power to kind of advocate for themselves. Anything from clean air issues, affordable, equitable transit is important, having the ability to get to work and do so in a way that not only is economical, but also just sustainable and affordable in your community. And buses still emit kinds of pollution as well too. And say the bus depots in your neighborhood, and so all these buses are coming into your neighborhood, bringing in pollution with them, and here you are, and you're breathing in that air,
Right.
So just a lot of different things: waste, pesticide reduction. Those are some of the things that we worked on. Mm-hmm. Even access to food. A lot of the term food deserts is something that, a lot of people think about when there's certain communities where they may not have a Whole Foods or Giant or a grocery store that allows them to get fresh food and fresh fruits and vegetables in their communities. And they may only have like a corner store, or unfortunately like a liquor store as an option. And so you're going to see the types of foods that we can have free access to, or depending on where we live, we have better access to food, whereas they may not. Sometimes you might see kids going to school eating potato chips, because that might be all that they have access to in their neighborhoods, or, they're not getting apples and oranges or have access to those kinds of things. So we try to advocate for those kinds of issues. And I'm very new to the organization, so I'm still learning, but I think it's a really great opportunity for me to just advocate for people who I care about, people who look like me, people, who we know, like growing up in Evanston, though Evanston is thought of as an affluent community, there still were issues with access there, depending on if you lived on the south side of Evanston versus the north side, where the bigger, more glamorous houses were right by the lake. So this work allows me to continue my passion for people. It's just a people thing. And especially in our country, where we're seeing, the real stark differences between people who have and people who don't, and that percentage of folks with money is just becoming smaller and smaller. The middle class is getting smaller and smaller, and the access to the things that we all should have fair access to, clean air, clean water to drink, and healthy food, so that we can sustain and maintain a healthy life. So I'm really excited about the opportunity to come and learn and just represent for people who look just like me.
One of the things that really struck me when I live now, I grew up in the city. I'm very much a city boy, but now I'm living in rural southeastern Colorado. And one of the things that struck me was the similarities to what I saw when I lived in Evanston or later in Baltimore, and the kinds of poverty issues that impact rural communities as well. We have some of the very same sorts of access issues to food. And that surprised me because there are lots of farms, but they're all industrial farms. And so a lot of the food is shipped out of the community. We do have some farmer stands that are open in the summer, but for most of the year, that's not available. We have lots of we don't have corner stores, but gas stations and lots of fast food. And one of the organizations that I'm on the board of is the local food pantry. And we've been running into an issue where people come for food, but they don't know how to cook. They want ramen, they want prepackaged food. We give them a bag of rice or flour. Often they don't know what to do with it. And that's one of the things that really concerns me.
Yeah.
That the food culture, the ability, the knowledge on how to cook is being lost.
That's a good point. I mean, just as I'm a single woman and, I could easily just, I don't say that I don't do this because I do. I could easily just eat out as much as I would like, and no one's going to know the difference. But, I do try my best to cook. And I think what cooking does is it just connects you with process. You know what I mean? Not like processed food, but the process of reading a recipe, choosing the ingredients, math. I have younger siblings, and so we do things where you measure out. Okay, well, how much is a cup of flour? What's a teaspoon of baking soda? All of those things, and it there's a lot of pride I know that I get out of cooking, seeing a recipe from being in a list form to putting out the ingredients to mixing it all together and putting it in the oven. And that is sad to know that here you are providing things that people need, but they don't even know what to do with it. And I think we have come to the place where we're just so used to things being in a box, and you just add water and 2 minutes later it's a meal, and it's
Right, yeah.
it's really sad to see in maybe the course of maybe 50 years just how much food has changed and what our relationship to food has become. So that's a really good point.
I mean, there's this weird dichotomy that's going on right now when it comes to food, because on the one hand, American cuisine has just flourished and boomed.
Yeah.
You look at the Food Network, compare it to what people were cooking in the 50s.
Right. It's true.
It's just boom. But that's an upper class or upper middle class kind of thing. When you look at poor people who in the past could cook, I have, old Hispanic ladies who grew up very poor, are wonderful cooks, very basic, simple cooking, but are very good at it.
Right.
And that's, I think, is disappearing, and I'm really concerned about that.
That's interesting. And it just speaks to even like with when people get financial assistance for grocery shopping and just the limitations that they might have. And you wonder why people end up at McDonald's, and it's like, well, for $5, I can feed my whole family, technically. You know what I mean? Like, the dollar menus or all these other things.
Yeah,
but while
exactly.
you might have an instant gratification of being full, your body isn't getting the nutrients that it needs. It's not going to sustain you. It's going to probably lead to some health issue down the line, or it's not going to make you healthy. It's just going to keep you full, So that's a really good observation that you've been able to make just from that experience.
Well, thank you. Let's talk some theology a little bit, because when we were sort of talking about what we wanted to talk about today, you mentioned the word creation care, which is a theological term that's kind of come into being in the last, 20 years or so.
Yeah.
Why don't you explain what that means and how that relates to your work?
Creation care is this theme or idea that connects Christians and people of faith to the idea that the world and all the things that are on it, everything from our vegetation to our animals to the birds in the sky to the air that we have, the water and the seas, all of those things are gifts from God, and He created it, and because we are His children, that we are supposed to be good stewards of His creation. And I think it's just another, hat or idea to just wrap people's minds about why they should care for the environment. I think what I've seen, the one's interest in taking care of the environment has become so political. It's considered a liberal thing to care about the air, to care about your neighborhood, to care about water and the animals and the trees. And I think it's maybe just a new way of reintroducing an idea that has long been something that people have cared about, but because of just how hyper political things are, sometimes I guess the evangelical community or people who choose or to say that they're Christians might be more on the conservative side with some issues. And so because environmentalism is thought of as something that is more liberal and, more associated with Democrats or tree huggers or these folks that want to smoke weed all the time, I don't know. But, maybe I see creation care as just a way of saying that, no, you can be a Christian and still care, and you should be a Christian and care about the environment. And for me, I'm a Christian, and I'm definitely not a theologian like yourself, or a really
I would
scholar.
hardly call myself a theologian.
I mean, hey, every Sunday you're in front of the church and you're giving some good word. You're giving people,
hopefully, yeah.
Right. So it's just another way to reintroduce some of these principles that have kind of long been a part or should have been a part of the Christian experience. But I think throughout time, especially again because of how hyper political everything is now, environmentalism has become something that doesn't really or hasn't always been of concern to the church here in America. And I think even with the new Pope and his interest in the lives of poor people and the lives of everyone, there's just been a growing pushback to that idea that being a Christian means that you, for whatever reason, you aren't thinking about the environment. There's been some pushback to that. And I think, the Pope's coming to the States in September. And I think that climate change is going to be a topic that he brings up too. So, the Catholic Church is definitely speaking to that. But I've spoken to like one of my pastors, and I'm like, well, why don't you ever hear sermons about the environment? I mean, the first thing Adam was told to do was to basically take care of the earth, to take care of the animals, and to name the animals, and to take care of the land. And that isn't a focus of churches now,
I've actually gotten into trouble for that. In my first 6 months, made, I thought, very mild comments that most evangelicals don't believe in global warming or in climate change. And I got emails about that. Don't get political here, you know?
Yeah. And that's unfortunate.
It is very unfortunate, yeah. I mean, I think part of it is that in the past, the church in the West has looked at Genesis and has said this thing of creation, of Adam and Eve being told to, well, we would say steward, to be good stewards of the environment.
That's a funny term.
Yeah, it is a funny term. But instead of to dominate, that we have dominion. I think the phrase is dominion over the earth, and that has meant exploiting the resources in order to build that up. And of course, that got connected with capitalism, which is why I think it's so political. Because in some ways, what you're saying, with environmentalism or with creation care, is that uncontrolled capitalism is not necessarily a good thing. That uncontrolled capitalism will take advantage of things that you're not supposed to take advantage of. And I think people resist that.
Yeah. And, I guess people don't like being told what to do, even if that thing that they shouldn't do isn't good. And I think it's just weird. I would think people want to pass something on to their grandkids, or know that 50 years from now, their kids can swim in that same little creek out back. But if you aren't taking care of it, how do you expect it to be there? I don't know. It's sad. It's sad that caring for other people isn't something that Christians push a lot. I think we've kind of become a me kind of Christianity, like, oh Lord, enlarge my territory,
Right.
It's always about us, so to speak. But the Lord told us to, love our neighbors like we love ourselves, and I don't know if we're doing that. And I mean, how can you love your neighbor if you're throwing garbage in their backyard? I don't know.
Yeah, I run into that, because even in church, the attitude sometimes is that, people come for their hour or two with God. They want to be inspired. They want to be comforted. And then they go off and they live their own lives. And often there's a disconnect between Sunday morning and the rest of your week.
Right.
And it's sort of this individualistic, consumer-minded model of church. And it's not just simply mega churches. It's also, I've experienced in small churches like myself. I think as a society, we are no longer well connected with one another, and we've become increasingly individualistic and increasingly isolated. And I think that plays out in how we feel about taking care of the poor or taking care of our environment.
Yeah, and I think I sent you something about just how, in terms of the statistics in America, more and more people are not going to church, me and my friends joke, we call it bedside Baptist. You can watch any church you want. You can watch it on television. You can listen to a podcast and hear that word and, get what it is that you need from it. And I think from the thing that I liked about my church, and my church back in Tampa was a very small church, House of Prayer, Missionary Baptist Church. It was more like family than it was like church. Was just that there was a sense of community and looking out for other people. And if there was a need that you had, someone in the church could help there. And I think when things become too big, they become less personal. And I think, like the Pew study that I sent you about just how more and more Americans aren't associating themselves with churches and don't really connect with a religion per se, kind of just speaks to just how things have become so big and so distant. And I guess the irony is, here we are, you're in Colorado and I'm in DC, and we haven't seen each other in years, but we did use technology to reconnect.
Right.
But I think sometimes technology allows for that. And then sometimes if you want to disappear into the world and never be found, technology allows you to do that as well, too.
That's the paradox of technology, I think, that on the one hand, we are more connected than we've ever been. It's easier to communicate with each other. But on the other hand, I think we're also more isolated than we've ever been. And there is this, people build up these virtual communities, which I'm certainly a part of, and it certainly has been beneficial for me. I have friends that I have never actually met. Yeah. And it's a good thing, but there are also limits to that. We still need, I think, human contact. And that's something that, if we want to talk about resources, I think is becoming a rarer resource in our own lives. My wife and I, we're so busy. She's in nursing school right now. I'm pastoring. We don't really see each other the way that I think we would want to. And so even when we're around other people, we're often, I think, very alone.
Yeah, and it's funny you bring that up. I've lived in D.C. for 3 years, and I have a small group of friends here in the city, but a lot of my friends aren't here in D.C. I'm in a constant text message with a number of people, and it's weird. It's serious. I don't even, people call me out on this all the time. I don't do pleasantries anymore. If we are in a text message and it's the morning time, I won't say good morning. Not that I don't care to say good morning, but in my mind, we're still talking. The conversation we had last night never ended. I just fell asleep, and I have so many conversations all day long that I don't ever say a word. I text the words, I email the words, I'm, typing something on Facebook, but I other than right now, or if someone physically actually calls me, I'm not saying anything. And it might be literally I'll wake up and I'll walk out the door, I'll catch the bus, I'll get on the train, whatever, and I won't say anything till about 9:30 in the morning. But I'm in constant communication with people via text. Yeah. So it's kind of weird. I don't know. I guess that's just where we are with technology, and I love it. My iPhone is connected to my hand. I remember I had really bad carpal tunnel one summer because all I did was text. So
yeah.
I mean, but at the same time, I still have a community, but they aren't people that I see every day.
And I think partly church. The decline of church, and that Pew study you sent me, I had seen it because things really exploded in the circles that I run around in about that. It is concerning information. It's part of the reality, though, that we're in. Mm-hmm. But, at one point, church, I think, more than a part of faith and belief, was also something about identity and social life. Mennonites used to have church 3 times a week, Sunday morning, Sunday evening, and then Wednesday evening. And your social life revolved around church.
Right.
And at some point, I think society said, you could be a good person and not go to church. And society was kind of like, well, bye. And now there are a gazillion other options and a gazillion other ways to connect with people and to develop relationships with people. And so I think church is just one more thing in this massive cloud of static and noise, and doesn't have the same sort of position that it used to have.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I mean, I've heard so many stories, just like Bible studies that will let out early so people can go home and watch a football game or watch Empire on Wednesdays or whatever. So, church is something you schedule. It's not always an experience, And I can't lie, I'm not affiliated with a church here in DC. I've attended churches and really enjoyed them, but I could go weeks without going, and then it requires me to put a little bit more effort into, like, where am I going to get some good word today? If it's reading a devotional or listening to a gospel song or something like that, like I'm almost having to church myself, and I'm not feeding myself the right way, but society does kind of allow for that whole kind of, McDonald's version of church where you just get it how you want it. And if you get it on Sunday, that's fine. If you get it on Wednesday, I can listen to Joel Osteen real quick for 23 minutes, and he might say 2 or 3 scriptures, and the rest is just be happy and smile. So,
I can't stand Joel Osteen. I'm sorry. Can I use the word heretic? I tend to view Joel Osteen as a heretic.
I hear you. I mean, for good or for bad, technology has really changed how we digest the Lord. How we all that in.
Well, I've read a number of comparisons between what's happening now and the Reformation, which was also a technology-driven change or revolution in the church. Martin Luther wrote down his disagreement, his 95 thesis, and nailed it to the door of the church in Wittenberg. But then people took that and they printed it up because the printing press was new, and so people could make arguments and it would go viral. And these things would get passed on, and
things went viral back then. Like
things went viral back then.
Like,
yes,
it was it like 20 reviews and it went viral, 100 reviews?
Not quite like that, but they would print up arguments about this is how we should understand the Bible, and they would send them out, and people would read them. And they would pass it on to the next person, and pass it on to the next person. And that's how ideas spread. And so this resistance to the Catholic Church and saying things need to be done differently, and we need to read the Bible for ourselves instead of having a priest tell us what to do, that all kind of went viral through the printing press. And so it was a technology-driven revolution. And I think right now with information revolution, information being so much more accessible that you can have the kind of church experience that you're looking for remotely, I think that's radically changing church.
Oh, yeah.
And
it's strange to me. Yeah.
We are totally unprepared for dealing with it. And nobody really knows how to respond to it and to do church in a time when people either aren't interested in traditional church or traditional church is completely unfamiliar to them. The idea of coming into a building, sitting in a pew, singing some songs you've never heard of before, listening to some guy go on for half an hour about some scripture you've never heard before, that is a very foreign kind of experience now for most people.
Yeah, I can hear that. And again, I'm single, and, when I do have a family, I hope church is a part of something that we do together. So hopefully I can get my act together and be a little bit more aggressive with putting the energy in being in the pew, and because it's a good feeling. You do come out more rejuvenated for the week and all those other kinds of things, or, being fed emotionally and spiritually, or even feeding someone else, through service, so I don't know.
So,
I guess,
if you don't mind me asking you, why aren't you connected with the church right now?
It's just so easy just to stay home. like I guess all the churches that I would want to attend here in the DC area aren't close, and I'd have to take the train. These are all excuses, Jeremy. These are just excuses.
No, it's okay.
And I don't know. You kind of get into your own mode of doing things, or you just find more and more reasons to not go. And then, like I said, you can just acquire the information that you want, that sermon that you want to hear. You can go online and get it and not have that face-to-face or that, hugging your neighbor and holding your neighbor's hand and praying for them experience. So it definitely, it becomes easier. It's not the right answer. It's just, well, I guess I don't have to go to church today, So I don't feel guilty telling the truth. It's just I just find a reason to do other things.
I understand. And I mean, what you're describing is something that I certainly experience and struggle with as a pastor. You know, people who have just kind of disappeared, who used to come to church regularly. And there's nothing like, it's not that they're mad at us. It's not that there are any problems. It's just that now they've got other priorities and things to do.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mostly pastor older folks, retired folks. And a lot of them are now traveling and visiting grandchildren and doing other things than coming to church on Sunday morning.
Yeah. That's heavy, right?
It is heavy.
You know, and I'll admit to this too. I tend to be a doer. Like if I see you and I really see that you need A, B, and C in your life, and for whatever reason it doesn't exist, I'm that person that would figure out how to do those things for you. And I give and give and give in so many other areas of my life on a volunteer level that I'm always just so worried that the moment I really get involved in a church, I'll want to give there too, and I'll just be stretched thin on a committee or something. I don't know. That's just me being honest. I need to do better, but
no, it's fine that you're honest. I think it's helpful what you're saying, because I think this is the part of the reality. It's not just you, it's a lot of people who feel the same kinds of things, and it's a challenge to figure out how do we minister and how do we continue to be the church at a time like this, at a time where we're not given the benefit of the doubt, at a time when our worst garbage is out there and easy to see, at a time when people are very critical, in part hypercritical, in part because we've also messed up in the past and continue to mess up and have abused power and have misused people and have made people feel horrible and guilty about themselves, and we're paying the cost for those kinds of things.
Yeah. I don't know. That's a tough one. It is true. It's hard, especially from a pastoral perspective. You do, in a way, become a public, have a public persona, and so much information about anyone is so readily available. And if you make any mistake, some people can jump on that and say, see, that's why I didn't want to come to your church, or, how can you preach this thing and you live this way, and I think people sometimes put too much of their energy and faith into that pastor, that they don't realize that church isn't about that pastor, but really about the relationship that they have with God.
Kareem. That has been one of the things that's been hard. I got out of seminary and started preaching, came to this congregation, and all of a sudden I'm speaking for God.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm just little old me here. I have a master's, and all of a sudden I'm speaking for God. And I discovered that one of some of the issues I had were because people had certain expectations that I would be a certain way, and that I would do certain things, and that I would look a certain way, and I'm not. There was sort of this awkwardness where I had people who were in their 60s and 70s who were expecting me to be a father figure to them in the way that pastors had always been father figures. And that was just not going to happen here. And so one of the things, it's been 4 years now that I have been in ministry. And so we've gotten used to each other, and that's helped. And I think the most of my church has accepted that I'm a younger guy with a young family, and I'm not going to look a certain way.
Right.
But, I've had to also be careful. And for example, I'm very geeky. That's why I do this podcast.
Yeah.
And I've recognized that I have to sort of protect that space, because if I put things out online that are very geeky, it gets misunderstood, and I'm always
like, Pastor Yoder, you can't like Game of Thrones.
Exactly. And I represent the church always. I don't have a private life, so I do things like a podcast, and I realized I needed to do this for myself. I had to do this, or I was going to go crazy.
But I listened to the Great Country one. I told you that, just talking about, the land out there.
Yeah.
I think it was your last episode. And in a way, it is a form of ministry. It's an opportunity to reach people who may not, who may care about that geeky side, but who may not have that church relationship. So it's not Jesus overload, so to speak, but it's subtle, and it's done in a way that you make it clear that you're a Christian. You know what I mean? So,
but I figured this is a private, passion kind of project where I bring myself and who I am to the table, and I don't try to beat anybody over the head with anything. And I've had some good conversations and interactions with folks who are not Christians, and so I think there are ways of this is just who I am and just part of who I am.
That's
and cool. It's been good. It's been really good. The show is growing. There are an increasing amount of listeners, and I am incredibly grateful for that.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about some geek stuff then, because you've let me know glasses. You're a bit of a geek yourself, and you were telling me that you're a huge Game of Thrones fan.
Yeah, and some more, and Game of Thrones, Sundays, 9 p.m. I am locked in front of a television trying to figure out what's going on with Jon Stark and Dany and Tyrion and all of that. And I am definitely spoiled. Like or unsullied. I am sullied. I am very spoiled. Like I do all of the Googling to figure out, on the wiki pages, like what are the theories? Like who's Jon Stark's mom? And like I listen to so many podcasts about that throughout the day as well. Like it's just so fascinating. And it's really, 10 weeks a year pretty much is what they give us. Like only 10 weeks, you guys? Is that all? And, I'm like, when is this G.R.R. Martin going to finish writing these other 2 books so we can get the rest of this series pumped out? Like, it's a good time.
We live about 4 hours away from Santa Fe, where George Martin lives. And my wife talks about wanting to go down there and stalk him and cook food for him so that he will finish the book.
Well, please.
And I'm
Let her do that.
I'm like, honey, I don't think that's a good idea.
Yeah, and I get, that the writing process, I'm sure, is very personal to him. And this is a good chunk of his life. It just feels like, I guess, in his own time, he'll figure it out and he'll put out the what is it, the 6th and the 7th book. But it's like, for real, like right now this season, a lot of what the Double Ds are writing is, I guess they know the end, so they can redo some of these storylines and put them out in a way that, like the whole Sansa Stark thing that's going on, like that isn't in the book. So they've rewritten some content, I guess, to
we're
make
off
it
book.
more appeasing.
We're off book.
Big time.
Yeah. So why do you love Game of Thrones? What's about Game of Thrones that you love?
I guess I don't care about the dragons. I don't care about the magic. I care about the people, and it's so political. And even like simple things like when Ned Stark was beheaded, and here he is, this honorable man that is about his family and protecting justice and making sure that the Lannister family is held accountable for their incestuous ways, and like all of these things. And he was trying to do what was right, and he died. And I guess it speaks to the fact that sometimes what is right isn't what's best. When you're looking at the interactions of other people's lives, and when things are political, and when things deal with power and a monopoly of power, it's just so interesting to watch. And I think the funny part is, like, some of us, I'm sure, are all rooting for the Stark family, but it's like that family can't catch a break for nothing. Like, everything is wrong. Rob got killed in the Red Wedding, and people just went crazy. Like, I mean, they can't win for trying, and they always try, and they're all just scattered to the winds. Like, where's Bronn? I want to know where Rickon is. Like, where did he go with Shaggy Dog? Like, him and that wildling lady, they just left, and, we're never going to see that little boy again. Like, where are these people, And it's just really a fascinating show. Very well written.
So you're involved then. I mean, really?
Yeah. I guess, yeah. I'm involved, and I'm not ashamed of it. It's just so well written.
It's good. It's good.
Such a well written show. Yeah.
So we're recording this. Now this will come out next week, but we're recording this the week after the quote-unquote wedding night between Ramsay and Sansa. Yes, the rape.
Yeah, the rape.
And it's caused quite a kerfuffle out on the internet. And so what are your thoughts about that? Were you upset by it?
Because I'm familiar with what's in the book, I knew I figured that was going to happen to Sansa. And then I think Sophie, the girl who plays her in real life, she was kind of hinting that something like that was going to happen or something very devastating was going to happen. So me being the spoilerific person that I am, I kind of had the inclination that it was going to go down. But it was sad to see, Sansa, that character, she had up to that point had just represented kind of purity and naivete and not someone who hadn't mastered the game yet and was more of a pawn, so to speak. And the change in the book that they were giving her was one of someone who seemed to have been more or would be more empowered this season. And I guess when she was raped, it was like, dang, what is that? What will that mean for her character? And I know some of the complaints about the scene was that it was less about her being brutalized and more about Reek or Theon's character responding to the brutalization of a woman. So and then I guess like one person I follow, Joanna Robinson of Vanity Fair, she was just saying, as much as the writers and producers of the show have diverted from the book's material, they could have easily not have done this rape scene and still have found a way to empower the Sansa character to still, seek vengeance for what the Boltons and the Lannisters did to her family without requiring her to become a victim of rape. So I definitely get that perspective, but it was an interesting scene. Reek's, the look on his face was just so tortured. And, I guess some people were like, well, why didn't we see Sansa's face? Why didn't we see it from her perspective? But just watching him watch it was horrible. So I'm looking forward to what this week's going to be about.
I had conversation about this with my wife. I was pretty upset by it. I was turned off by it. I was like, I really wish this hadn't happened. Why does it have to happen? And I talked with my wife who defended the scene, and she felt a lot like you did, that Westeros is the kind of world and Ramsay's the kind of person this was going to happen. This was bound to happen.
It was going to happen. I don't see, dude is evil. That Ramsay. Evil. He flays people. He strips people by the skin, and he chased people, in the forest and tricked them and hunted them like wild dogs. Theon's character, he totally, Stockholm syndrome? He's going through it because of the mutilation that he's experienced. So it was kind of like a question of, well, when is he going to show his real character to Sansa? He didn't waste any time. So I guess it's what's going to happen in a couple days? What's happening on Sunday? Because I'd like to see it.
I think what's really critical is how the show then handles the implications and the fallout over this.
Yeah.
Whether or not...
The North remembers.
Yeah, because Sansa was starting to come into her own and stop being just simply a victim. And now the question is whether this then becomes more reason for her to kill Ramsay or whatever it is that's going to happen, or whether or not they're going to treat her as a victim. And so I'm kind of waiting to see what's going to happen here.
Well, I guess we'll see on Sunday. And, Littlefinger, I think a lot of people are of the opinion, too, that Littlefinger didn't know how gruesome Ramsay Bolton was. So, him leaving her there, it's we don't ever know what his plan really is anyway, I guess, just to get power. And, what is it? Chaos is a ladder. But I have no clue what he thought her experience was going to be like, because we as viewers know that he's a horrible person. So,
well, I want to ask you a question, because it came up this week too. Matt Walsh, who is a commentator, Christian commentator, wrote a column this past week basically saying now's a good time for Christians to stop watching Game of Thrones. And he admits that he actually only watched the first episode and then stopped. But, Game of Thrones is a very adult show with a lot of violence and a lot of sex, a lot of fairly, uncomfortable sex things, like incest. Why would you say that it's okay then for somebody who's a Christian to watch or consume media that is that way?
We wouldn't watch anything then. If we, I'm only going to speak from my perspective, because I'm a baby Christian, as I call it. I'm learning as I go. But I guess technically we shouldn't be watching Games of Thrones. We shouldn't be watching anything on television. because nothing is pure. Nothing is, if we were to live according to, I think, what God would want and prescribe for us, we wouldn't be watching anything. Mm-hmm. Nothing on broadcast television is, I guess, Christian, or it would be, you know, I guess that's why there's Christian television, to provide people with an alternative from what is on mainstream television.
But Christian television is terrible. Come on, you know that.
It's corny. Is that what you're saying?
It's terrible. It's awful. Corny. It's corny. It's not interesting.
It can be. You know, I've watched some, TV One is one of my favorite channels, and it's like a channel that kind of caters to middle class African Americans or whatever. And they've done some really good movies, taking stories in the Bible and kind of rejuvenating them for nowadays times. And they've done, like, they did one on Job. So, like, a man who was a very successful businessman in today's time, and similar to the Job story, God and the devil were talking, and the devil was saying, well, you know, this man, you've blessed him his whole life, so why else wouldn't he honor and praise you, you know? And they did the whole similar thing to the scripture where they challenged, you know, it was the challenge of, well, what happens if you take everything away from him? Will he continue to praise you? That kind of thing. And they did a wonderful job, TV One did, with making that movie look and feel very current. And then they did another one with the story of Ruth, I think it was, you know, a woman who becomes a Christian because she marries into a family, and that whole.
Well, she doesn't become a Christian; she's Jewish.
Right.
Jewish.
Well, in the movie,
in the movie, she became Christian. Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know. There's some good options, but yeah, it is kind of corny.
I think though, if we turned the Bible into a movie, we would have some of the same problems as Game of Thrones, because there is stuff in the Bible that is not G-rated at all.
Oh, yeah. Like your boy, what's his name?
I mean, there's incest, there's David, David who has all kinds of affairs.
David was cheating like nobody. David was like soap opera style. He was cheating and looking at people on the balconies, like, hey, girl, you cute, you know, like he.
There's rape, there's incest, there are all those kinds of things. And I think sometimes that Christian culture, you know, is trying to be safe and to be a safe place that we know what's going to happen. We never have to deal with anything that disturbs us or challenges us, that we are in this bubble. And if you read the Bible closely, it's not a bubble. And we don't really live in bubbles. And I don't think we should tell stories that are just safe as bad storytelling. And I think that's partly of what, you know, I end up rolling my eyes about some of the stuff at Game of Thrones, because after a while, you know, oh, HBO, you're being HBO. You know, once again, we have the sex scene we don't really need, but okay. You're being
all that
HBO.
frontal nudity.
Yeah, you're being HBO. You know, the weirdest one were the sex positions, you know, where they're telling you what's happening in the story while having sex. And you're like, really? That's just ridiculous. So, but what I'm trying to say is I don't think life is safe, and I don't think our stories should be safe. And I think part of my challenge as somebody who loves this kind of stuff is to be who I am, stay true to what I believe, try to understand and analyze it, talk about it, say, here's where I disagree, this is what I find problematic, and still love it and enjoy it. And I think that's something we can do. Yeah,
well, I enjoy it. I think God knows that we fail. You know, we're not ever going to be perfect in how we approach our lives. You know, our thoughts are, you know, rarely ever pure. We can try and be very deliberate in that, but we are constantly failing. Our flesh is so weak. And I think thankfully he's forgiving. And I think just being in the world, I guess it's trying to not being of the world. I don't know, all these little cliches that they throw at you in church, but I definitely, I'm still going to watch it every Sunday. I don't know. Sorry, Lord. But I enjoy it. You know, I think it's really great storytelling. And you're right. The Bible has tons of stories in it that, if were fully depicted as they occurred, would have some nudity, would have some really disturbing things going on, and it probably wouldn't be rated G. So
no. And I think we've made the Bible too safe, and because it's too safe, it doesn't speak into people's lives, I think, the way that it should.
Yeah, flowery King James language and stuff.
Well, yeah, and we tend to idolize the people in the Bible. That we talk about how wonderful, how faithful they are. You know, I remember when I was in seminary, not in seminary, this was an undergrad in college as an English major. I took a Bible religion class and feminism class, and we watched it. We were talking about Abraham and Sarah, right? And our prof showed us a clip, and it was of some Bible movie, and Abraham and Sarah were out there in the desert, and they were looking at each other lovingly, you know. And then we read part of the scripture where, you know, Abraham tries to pass off Sarah as his sister, and tries to pimp her out to the Egyptian Pharaoh.
You said pimp.
I said pimp. He tried to pimp her out. And, you know, like, you read the Bible, this was not a happy marriage. This was a really dysfunctional family. But we've glossed all over that. And we focus on how wonderful and how full of faith these people are. And they stop being real people, real characters. They become, I don't know, it becomes fake storytelling, you know? I think when it comes to my faith, I am not a perfect person. I've got woundedness and brokenness in my life, and we need to be open about that we struggle to be disciples of Jesus. And I think we gloss over that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like, life is a struggle. Everything. Nothing. I think the assumption is that the moment you become a Christian, like, everything is easier. And I don't think that's the truth.
Utter nonsense. That is complete and total utter nonsense. And it's a lie, and it's a damaging lie. A number of months ago, I was visiting another church, and the pastor was talking about how, you know, we're supposed to be a holy people that's been set aside. And I'm like, I have no interest in that. I don't think I'm particularly holy. I think I'm trying to work towards that. But I'm not sure it's something I ever will arrive at. And I think we have this idea that when we become Christians, we arrive. And we've got it all together. And I think that's just not true. And that's one of the things that I would love to see change about how Christians act. Yeah.
And I know, like right now, I'm listening to a lot of music that isn't Christian music. I'm listening a lot to Kendrick Lamar, and he is this really, really great rapper out of Compton, LA, and he's young, and he's like poetic, like he's really, really awesome. And he talks about faith, and he talks about the struggle, doing what he knows is right versus doing like what folks around him are, you know, doing, and the peer pressure of life. And he's got a song like where it's like the devil talking to him. Like, you know, I know you want all this money, and, you know, but I can give you these things, and I know you were praying on your last album, but whatever, you know. And he even says, what's wrong? You know, you said this is what you wanted. And, you know, they say if you're scared, go to church. But, you know, he goes to the church too, meaning the devil is at the church too, you know. So it's just, you know, this internal struggle, wanting to do what's right and knowing what's right and wanting to please God, but just knowing that everything around you is the opposite of that, and trying to ward your way through it, and, you know, be strong in spite of, and knowing that sometimes you're going to fall and you're not going to be on target. And most of the time you won't be on target. So it's like this constant, you know, every day you wake up, another opportunity to do it a little bit better than you did it the day before. So, and I appreciate that even in something that people see is very secular, like hip hop music, that, you know, this one guy or just a number of people can still share their faith in a way that speaks to the community that they represent, you know.
Well, the line between the sacred and the profane is a lot thinner than we think it is, you know? I mean, what's the root of hip hop? It's gospel music, you know? And true. So that line isn't or the blues or whatever. It's not that strict. And we think that there are these clear lines, and they're not.
Yeah, I guess, you know, just culture is a dichotomy, and there's, you know, it to say that everything is good and evil is hard when there is so much gray in between. And, you know, life, I don't know, it's just, you know, finding your way through everything that's going on around you and still kind of maintaining your sanity. And I know, I guess my sanity, it is God-driven. Like, oh, Lord, just help me keep a clear mind today. Help me, you know, work past my limitations and do something that will help your people or will, magnify you and me, So it's definitely a challenge.
There are days when I have to pray, Lord, just help me get through this day.
Pretty much.
I don't know how I'm going to do it,
Oh, pretty much. Oh my goodness, for sure. Mm-hmm.
Well, Kareen, we've been at this for about an hour, and it's been fantastic. An hour. Yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
Yes, I will. I do. I wanted to make sure that we dedicate this podcast to the memory of Mr. Edward C. Pate, who was the principal at Chute Middle School there in Evanston, Illinois. He and his wife, Claire Pate, were both of our principals through
middle school,
elementary and middle school, and they were just really, really profound educators. Really stressed diversity and inclusion and education, and I say this very earnestly. I'm glad that I stuck to the idea of honoring him in December of 2014, just a couple months ago, when I went home, because he passed a couple months later, and he was a really great educator. He was a father figure to a lot of people back home, and he and his wife were just awesome. You and I talk about just our time at Oakton and Chute, and just how influential they were. So I just wanted to make sure that we dedicate this little talk to him.
Well, why don't you say a couple of quick words about what you did in December and how you honored the Pates, both Clara and Edward Pate.
Well, Sharita Alexander and I, and what happened was, quick story, Maura Murphy-Barras, who was our friend from elementary school, who we haven't seen in years either, she posted a photo of just some of us from our 5th grade graduation. And just remember that day? It was like a flooding on Facebook of all these memories. And remember when we did that? And I even remember, and I think it's awesome that, you shared that, while in elementary school, one song that Mrs. Pate made sure that all of us knew was Lift Every Voice and Sing, and
I still get chills. I still get chills from that song. It speaks to me very powerfully.
Yeah. And so just from that one day, when she posted that photo, the idea just came, we should do something for the Pates. And so the idea of Pate's Kids came up because, we're all a product of their legacy and the mission that they have for education. And so Sharita and I were talking, and I spoke with, some other graduates from Chute and Oakton, and Melinda Siegel, who was a drama teacher and dance. We just kind of threw together a little event, where we invited the Pates to come out, and we tried to get as many alums to come out as possible right after Christmas. And I didn't realize how awesome it was going to be, but we had a gospel choir from Africa and a group of kids from Evanston who sing in a chorus come, and they were singing all these songs. I think they sang Lean on Me for them and all this other stuff. And it was just a really great opportunity. And the Pates were able to share their story. And, they had long retired from teaching in Evanston, but they were, I think he was the first African-American principal of a middle school, and she was one of the first African-American principals of an elementary school. And Oakton and Chute were maybe, 3 blocks away from each other?
Yeah, they were pretty close.
Yeah, so even though it felt more like a campus than it did like individual elementary and middle schools. And so once you graduated from 5th grade, you still were under the covering of the Pate family when you moved to Chute Middle School. So yeah, we just honored them. And I just cried the whole time, Jeremy. I'm such a punk. Mr. Pate gave me his handkerchief. And I was like, it got messy. It was just a lot of tears and stuff. And I guess you don't realize how much people mean to you, until you can really look back. And, sometimes, unfortunately, you aren't able to understand or grasp people's importance until they pass. And I'm just so thankful that it was put on my heart. And I really do believe it was God that put it on my heart to honor them when they were alive. They were a part of the Evanston community for over 30 years with, many, many people who were educated under them or were mentored by them to go into education. They made me aware of what was going on around me and culture and acceptance and all that good stuff. So just definitely want to thank the Pates for their dedication to education.
So, Kareem, where can people find you on the internet?
Well, I am on the Twitter. You can find me at Green Kerene, and that's the @ symbol, Green, and then Kerene is spelled Kerene. The Green Kerene Twitter account is kind of where I'm going to try to share more environmentally aware tweets or socially conscious tweets. My personal Twitter is KNT880 or at KNT880, and that's where you're going to see me tweet about Games of Thrones and all the horrible stuff on TV, because from Games of Thrones to Love and Hip Hop in Atlanta, I kind of watch a little bit of everything. So I do all my my silly tweeting there. Yeah, I'm on the Twitter, so if people want to follow me, they're definitely welcome to do that. But don't get crazy with me, because I am Twitter bold, and if you get out of hand, I will get right with you. So that is my warning to anybody who wants to come and be silly with me on the Twitter. But yeah. So I just want to thank you, Jeremy, for inviting me. I was a little hesitant, but this is quite fun.
Well, thanks. Well, maybe sometime we'll have you on again.
Oh, okay. Well, let me know if people actually liked it. I'm a little verbose. I'm a little talkative, but I guess that's...
You're not the first verbose person I've had on here, so you're fine.
Okay.
You're fine. If you like Geek Cross, please help us out and leave us a review on iTunes. You can find Geek Cross on Facebook and Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @GeekCrossShow. You can email geekcrossrow@gmail.com. Geek Cross is a McLaren production. My name is Jeremy Yoder. Thanks for listening.